Good morning, Tri-Cities Church. Welcome to all of you here in the building, and welcome to you joining us online. I know we normally don't start with this, but I'm taking one of my announcements from the end and moving it up. For those of you here in the building, there are cards on the back of your seat, and these are for you to fill out if you're new and visiting, but they're also for our family to fill out prayer requests. The staff collect these and they pray over these during the week. So I wanted to give you time during the service to put your prayer requests on these, and you can drop them in the buckets on your way out, or you can hand them to the people at the Next Steps table. So welcome. Thank you for coming this morning and joining us. We are going to have an amazing morning. Let's just pray and thank God for what he's done. God, we thank you for just allowing us to have this space to come gather and worship you. And we just ask that you would fill the space this morning and fill us with vision and hope and direction for the future. God, we thank you, and we want to worship you today. Amen.
Get up on your feet and let's praise God.
Thanks be to God who always causes us to triumph in his name. Thanks be to God who always causes us to win. Yeah. Thanks be to God who always causes us to triumph in his name. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. We have overcome. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We have overcome by the power of your name. Jesus, you're the one. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. The one who made a way for us to triumph in his name. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah. Oh, 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 yeah. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God who always causes us to triumph in his name. Thanks be to God who always causes us to win. Yeah. Thanks be to God who always causes us to triumph in his name. Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. We have overcome. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. We have overcome by the power of your name. Jesus, you're the one. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. The one who made a way for us to against the Lord. No one can, no one will. Who will stand against the King? No one can, no one will. Oh, victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Oh, victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Who can stand? Who can stand against the Lord? No one can. No one will. No one will. Oh, and who can stand? Who can stand against the King? Nobody can. No one can. No one will. No one will. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. Victory belongs to Jesus. Yes, it does. Victory belongs to Him. Victory belongs to Jesus. Victory belongs to Him. So we put our trust in You. Yes, we put our hope in You. You will deliver. You're a provider. I find my victory in You. Forever victorious. Forever we win. Forever we win. I find my victory. I find my victory in You. You will deliver. You will deliver. You're a provider. You're a provider. I find my
Yes, Lord, the victory belongs to you. We thank you for this time that we are victorious because you have allowed us to overcome and to be victorious. It's in Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Good morning, Tri-Cities Church. It is a wonderful fall Sunday. I was telling someone if the weather stays like this forever, I will be grateful to God. Not that I'm not, but this is it right here. Don't change. Don't get any hotter, any cooler if it just stays just like it is. It's as close to heaven on earth as we will get. Well, good morning for those who are in the building, for those who are watching online. Remember, today is a very special day. So let me just say this before we jump in. I want to make sure that those of you who have not been able to download our mobile app, make sure that you go in your app store, do that because you'll get notifications about things that are going on, being reminded to register to come on Sunday. And as we move on, especially into the new year, you'll find there'll be a whole lot of other cool things that will be available on the app in addition to the messages. So make sure that you do that. Also, as always, make sure that you're subscribing to the newsletter. We have so many ways that we try to communicate with you all, whether you're here or at home. So make sure that you stay in the loop with all the ways that we try to communicate with you, because oftentimes we hear people say, I didn't know that was happening. And what I'll tell them, like, it's on Facebook, it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, it is in the newsletter, it is just about everywhere that we could possibly put it. So make sure, even if you're not on social media, make sure you subscribe to the newsletter. That way it hits your inbox and your email every Thursday and you know what's going on. And that's because we try to be a church to live up to our value of authenticity. We want to make sure that you know what's going on in your church, that you know ways that you can participate in what's going on and the things that are important to us as we move forward as a church. So today is Vision Sunday. Now, we actually did this last year. It doesn't seem like last year, but for those of you who remember, we took a Wednesday night in 2020 and we did Vision Night, and we did it similar to what we're going to do this morning. And then it was in February, and I was telling the team in the back, and we had a great Vision Night. People were pumped up. We were excited. You know, you remember how 2020, it was supposed to be like the year of vision, and everybody was talking about this is going to be my year, and I'm getting my business plan together. We're getting our vision together as a church, and we talked about it in February, and we worshiped, and we prayed, and we went out here saying this is going to be our year to take the city, and then March came. And the bottom fell out of the world, and everything just was topsy-turvy. And it was just one of those years where you're like, I don't know how much of any of this stuff is going to happen now. But it's important for us as a church and as leaders to make sure that you all know what the vision is. So if you notice, we talked about every year, we're going to talk about the values of Tri-Cities Church. Remember I said that's like the frame that holds us accountable, that we make sure we never veer outside of our values. And then we just finished a series on the vision of the church, and we talked about the three things that we want to be as a church, and that is to be a place where people can build their faith, a place where people can belong and feel like they belong to a family, not just a weekend gathering, but you belong to a real family. And then also to be a place where we can be the church, not just talk about church, not just talk about what it would look like to be the hands and feet of Jesus, but to actually be that out in our community every single day of our lives. And so this is giving you today the particulars of what that looks like over the next couple of years, but also to help you to understand where we are. So I want to start with, before I get into some of the details of how we're doing as a church, I want to start with a verse from Proverbs 29 and 18. Proverbs 29 and 18. A lot of what I'm going to teach before we get into the particulars is not necessarily going to be on the screen, so take notes, put it in your phone, whatever you need to do. Proverbs 29:18. One version says, where there is no vision, the people perish. I think that's NLT or NIV. I like Eugene Peterson's Message translation. We're going to read from that. Proverbs 29:18, the Message translation. It says, if people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, they are most blessed. Did you catch that? When people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over. Did you catch what the writer of the proverb says? They stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what God reveals, they are most blessed. So one of the things that you have to understand, and I've learned to understand over the years about vision, is that it's not just about creating a document of conclusions. Because many times, and whether you call it a vision or a resolution, we do this sometimes at the beginning of the new year. We create a vision board or a list of resolutions. And many times, to a certain degree, this is important. It includes a bunch of conclusions. Like at the end of a certain marked period of time, I would like this to be the conclusion. You know what I'm talking about. At the end of the year, I would like this to be the conclusion of all the activities. I would like to have produced this. This is the conclusion that I'm shooting for. And to a certain degree, that's important. But when you learn biblically what they talk about when they talk about vision, it is much more than just making a document of conclusions. It's about creating a document or a sort of list of things that you want to be committed to. So it's less about conclusions than it is commitments. You following me? That when I want to have a vision for my life, but also the life of the church, maybe even you're thinking about personally, what is the vision that I want for my life? Where do I want to see myself end up? It's not always just about listing the conclusions. You should have some idea of how you want things to end, and you work your way towards that. But what I found is ultimately it's about a list of or a document of commitments. That I have to be committed to some things in order to be the type of person who can see what God is doing in my life. Oftentimes, we have taken this idea of vision and we've made it more about our ambition. There's nothing wrong with having ambition. You know me by now. I'm a fairly ambitious person. I like to see things get done. I consider myself a visionary. I like to see things progress. I like to see myself grow. I like to see you all grow. But ultimately, it's not just about listing a bunch of conclusions. It's about commitments. Did you catch what the writer of Proverbs says? When people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. Many times, and maybe it's just me, I'm preaching to myself, the reason why I end up at the end of the year or the end of a marked period not having accomplished much of what I've set out to do is because my own ambition has overridden what God is actually trying to do in my life, and I end up stumbling all over myself and nothing gets accomplished. What God wanted to have accomplished in my life doesn't get accomplished, and my own selfish ambition doesn't get accomplished. And haven't anybody else been there before? You end up at the end of a year or a marked period of time, and you realize, I haven't gotten anything done. God didn't do anything with me, and I didn't do anything with myself. And that's the most frustrating part of life, because at least, and I'm not saying ever go against God, but at least if I'm going to have my own ambition, at least can I accomplish some of that? The writer says that in order to really understand what vision is, we have to attend to what God is already doing. I think sometimes we believe that we are the ones who carry God into a community or into a situation or into our family as if God has not already been there actively working. And the problem is that we enter into a season, sometimes it's the new year, we enter into a family, we enter into a situation, we enter into a community or organization saying, these things that are my personal ambitions are a vision from God. And the problem is God is saying, I've been here way before you got here. I'm already working, I'm already doing things, I'm already maneuvering things around, I'm already positioning the right people. You don't necessarily have to come in with something that is your ambition. You just have to come in and create an environment where you can properly discern what God is already doing. The writer of Proverbs says, when people can't see what God is doing, not what you're doing, when you can't see what God is doing, you end up stumbling all over yourself. So vision then is about positioning ourselves not to just make a list of conclusions, but to have some commitments that create an environment that make it possible to see what God is doing. As Pastor Rick Warren says, the pastor of Saddleback in California, he says, he makes an analogy. I've never been surfing. Maybe some of you have been surfing. He makes the analogy that surfers don't create waves. They discern waves and then they ride them. And much of what you want God to accomplish in and through your life is going to be dependent on your ability and my ability and our ability as a church to discern what God is doing in this season. Okay, so now you realize, and I set you up over the last couple of weeks, because remember what I told you when Jesus says you got to learn how to serve in the season you're in? Okay, some of y'all are picking up what I'm putting down. I said you didn't even realize I was setting you up, because most of what we have to do as a church is dependent upon our ability to discern what God is doing in the season that we're in and serve him. That's vision. You following me? So then vision then is about creating environments that increase our ability to discern what God is doing around us and among us. And vision then is creating a conversation with God that keeps us from getting in the way of what God is already doing. It is whatever your list is, and this is good for you if you're leaning in at home. This is even good for your personal life. It's about creating an environment where you're constantly discerning and you're constantly in conversation with what God is already doing in the ways that God is already actively working, so that you and I don't get in God's way. Because I don't want to end up a marked period of time or the end of the year saying that I've accomplished absolutely nothing, that God is not using me to do anything, and most of that is because I've gotten in God's way. The writer says, when you can't see what God is doing, when we can't see what God is doing, we stumble all over ourselves. But, he says, when they attend to what God reveals, they find themselves being most blessed. So then you notice that we talked about the values, the vision. The values keep us committed to the type of people that we want to be. Remember, we said this is less about doing and more about being. The values of Tri-City Church, it helps us to be committed. Remember, I just said that vision is not just a bunch of conclusions, it's a bunch of commitments. It helps us to stay committed to the types of people that we believe God wants us to be. Not just do, but us to be. And then the vision keeps us in conversation with God about what he intends to do with us as a local church. Now you see why we talk about the values and the vision every year, because we want to continually remind ourselves these are the values that we are committed to. We are committed to being these type of people, intentional, diverse. We're committed to being generous. Those are the types of people that we want to be. And it makes sure that we create an environment that now we can continue to be in conversation with God through the vision of the church to see what God is doing in the life of his church. You following me? So the values, they commit us to the type of people we want to be, and the vision keeps us in conversation with what God is already doing. So all this is done, and I hope you notice this, it's all done by attending to the environment. So even if over the years you've heard me preach about the parable of the sower and the seed and the reason why the seed is not growing. You remember that? And all of it boiled down to the environments were stopping the seed from becoming what God had naturally and organically blessed it to become. Most of what you will experience in your life in trying to become all that God has called you to be is the fact that the environment is choking out your ability to be who God has called you to be. That's why we talk about the values and the vision and creating an environment. When we say that the vision being a place where people can build their faith, belong to family, and be the church is much more about creating an environment than it is creating programs. Because when the environment is right, you will come and be a part of a church, and we have tried as leaders to clear the way to create a proper environment so that whatever it is that God has called you to be, whatever that seed is, when it hits the soil, it will become everything that God has called it to be. My job and our job as leaders is to make sure as a church, watch me, we don't get in the way of what God is creating on the inside of you. So that when you come here and you hear the singing and the message and you're in small groups and you do all the things that we're asking you to do, it is set so that it will create an environment so that God can work in and through your life, and that you don't stumble around in competition with God for the purpose of your life, that we try to create an environment where you can discern what God is doing in your life and in the life of the church and in this community, and what your role is in participating in that, so that whatever God has planted on the inside of your heart, you have the best opportunity to become that. That's vision. You following me? So we want to be a place where we can build faith, belong to family, be the church, because it's about creating an environment. There's 3 important elements to understanding what God is doing, because the writer of Proverbs says, when you can't see what God is doing, you stumble all over yourself. The issue is then, how do we learn how to see what God is doing? Because let's be honest, this past year plus has been very difficult to see a lot of things. A lot of stuff is going on. There's been a lot of things that have drawn our attention to different areas, and some of it, our attention needed to go there. But let's be honest, the reason why it's been so difficult is because so much stuff has been thrown at us as individuals, as families, as a church, that sometimes, let's be honest, it gets hard to see if God is doing anything. It's hard to see in my own life what God is doing, because I have so much trouble and so much trauma and so many things that I'm trying to work through, that it becomes hard to see what God is doing. So let me just share with you, before I get into helping us to see what God has been doing in our church, there are 3 things that I learned that is true if you study all the Old Testament prophets. There's 3 things that are true about why they were able to speak to the people and to share with them what God is doing and where God is going. You ready? It's not on the screen, so take notes. The first thing is, in order to see what God is doing, we have to have what's called hindsight. Hindsight, you know what that is. It is taking a look backward. Many times, in order to catch a glimpse or a vision of what God is doing, you got to take a look back and see what God has done, so you can start to establish the patterns in which the ways that God is working currently. It's hard to do that sometimes when everything is getting thrown at you. But if you study any of the Old Testament prophets, even Jesus, you will see that part of that process of casting vision of God's people includes hindsight, taking a look backwards. This is why Jesus is constantly, I don't know if you call it this, in the New Testament, always quoting the Old Testament. This is what the prophets said. Remember, Jesus does this all the time. All the law and the prophets, pointing back to what God has done in the past. He talks about Moses. He talks about the ways that God has worked in order to get people to see the ways that God is working. So the first thing we have to have is hindsight. We'll take a look back this morning on what God has done. The second thing, in order to see what God is doing so that you don't stumble all over yourself, is you got to develop a gift for insight. So after you can see what God has done, hindsight, then you need insight. The prophets had insight. What is insight? It's taking a look beneath. So first you got to be able to take a look backward. Then you got to be able to take a look beneath. What is God doing on the surface? Because many times God is working in ways beneath the surface that we totally ignore or we're ignorant of, because we're so bombarded with all the problems that we have that sometimes we can't take a look underneath the surface and see what God is actually doing. Everything doesn't always appear the way that it is. What Jesus was a master at, what the prophets in the Old Testament were masters at, is not only giving the community a glimpse and hindsight, but also insight, taking a look beneath. And then that leads to the last thing that helps vision, which is foresight. That is taking a look beyond. You following me? It's not on the screen, so make sure you take your notes. This is even good for your own personal life at home. Write this stuff down. Hindsight, taking a look backward. Insight, taking a look beneath, and then foresight, taking a look beyond. Based on what God has done in the past, and based on what it looks like God is doing, when I take time to pray and discern what it's like beneath the surface, I'm recognizing patterns, I'm recognizing the things that God is organically putting together. Sometimes you will discover that God is doing stuff in ways that you're not even trying to accomplish. God is accomplishing stuff that you didn't even notice. You take hindsight, insight, foresight. Here's why we're doing what we're doing today. You'll notice as I go through everything that we're going to talk about today, it's portion hindsight, there are portions of insight, and there's portions of foresight. But here's why this is important. If you don't remember anything else I say this morning, that I've discovered when it comes to vision, in order to become a better servant, I've got to become a better seer. Because in order for me to serve the season that I'm in, whatever that looks like, whatever the troubles and the difficulties, in order for me to be a better servant, I have got to learn the discipline and the practice of becoming a better seer. So now I take time to reflect on what God has done. I take time to look beneath the surface of what is really going on. Even in moments of suffering, how is God working in my life? One of the things that I had to do, even as I sat in chemotherapy, taking medicine that was really beating my body up, is as difficult as this is, what is God saying to me beneath the surface? What is God saying to you in the middle of your suffering? What is God saying to you in the middle of your grief? What is God saying to you in the middle of a difficult situation? Because as you reflect on what God has done, God will show you what he's doing, and then he'll show you where he's taking you. You follow me? Hindsight, insight, foresight. In order to be a better servant, we got to learn to be better seers. So one of the reasons why we try to be authentic and transparent with you is because we want all of us to grow into being better servants of Jesus. But as it relates to us as an organization, the only way for us to stand up here and ask you to do things and to be involved in small groups and to volunteer and to do the things that we're asking you to do as servants is to help you to be better seers of what God is doing in your church. So I believe that the reason why this is important, and we'll get into the details, it ultimately is because we want you to be better seers of what God is doing in your life and in the church, so it increases your ability to be better servants. So now the things that we ask you to do and the things that we ask you to pray about and the ways that we ask you to be generous, it makes sense because you can see it. So this is going to take 3 sections that I'm going to go through for us to understand what's going on in our church. The first section, I'm going to talk about the finances of the church. We're going to be transparent and let you know how we're doing. Second section, I'm going to talk about, for a little bit, facilities, things that we were able to accomplish, things that we did, and maybe just a few things that we want to do. And then the last section will be the foresight, the future. What is our 3 to 5 year plan? Now, understand this is not all exhaustive, because I could stand up here for 3 hours and tell you everything that has happened and everything that we have discerned that God is doing and everything that we want to do. So this is not exhaustive. This is giving you the highlights and the most important things for you to know so you can get some hindsight about what God has done. You can get some insight about what that means and then some foresight about where we're going. You following me? All right, so finances. Go ahead and put up on the screen. We want to talk a little bit about what's been going on. I want to give you some hindsight. So if you have the year 2017, so you can see all of that. Now, here's what I want you to see. This is 2017 through 2020. Why are you showing us all of this? Why are you going back? Because I want you to get some hindsight. So on the right is the budget for that year. And you see in that column the expenses and the income that we budgeted for. So budget is, here's what we anticipate based on the trend of what we are going to bring in as a church and what we're going to have to spend as a church to do ministry. You follow me? That's that right column under there where it says budget. So you see in 2017, our expenses that we budgeted for were $223,000. We budgeted for $241,000 in income. And you can go all the way down to 2020. You following me? Is this making sense? The next year, $240 in expenses, $250 in income. 2019, $234 in expenses, $260 in income that we budgeted for. That's what we anticipated. $274 in expenses, and then an income that we budgeted $295. Now, on the other side is what we actually did. Those are actual numbers. So above that, you see actual. So on the right, again, I want to make sure you understand this so you can be good seers. That's what we budgeted for. On the left column is the actual. Now, these numbers are rounded up, obviously. But actual 2017 expenses and income were close, pretty close. Actually, 1,000 over. Income in 2018, the actual, we had 294,000 expenses. Income was a little bit less than that. 2019, you see that our expenses did not exceed our income in actual dollars. Then in 2020, we raised the budget just a little bit, and our actual income and expenses went up. Now, here's something to note because of the way that we budget. We actually budget every year for a deficit. We budget for a deficit because we include items that depreciate in value. So things that we purchase. So the reason why that number has gone up, and you notice there's a note there that in 2020, about 23,000 of that is non-cash depreciation. Why? Because we purchased some much-needed equipment like the technology to stream, the technology to do for better sound, those types of things, new computers for the staff. Those things depreciate in value, so we account in our accounting for depreciation. You follow me? So there's always going to be what looks like a negative, as we are doing the budget, it's always going to have included in there a depreciation, which is going to come out. Now, those are non-cash items. In other words, that doesn't mean that there's cash that we're losing. That means that we own property that is depreciating. You following me? So the reason why I wanted to show you this in hindsight is so that you can see Tri-Cities Church has always been a fiscally responsible church. If you look at what we budgeted for and what we actually brought in, it's always very close. Very close. As a matter of fact, in 2020, even in the pandemic, if you take out that $23,000 cash depreciation, which is included in the income, we're actually maybe about $1,800 over in expenses. So again, you see, over the last 4 years, we have always been a fiscally responsible church. We don't spend way more than we bring in. That's what I'm trying to tell you. In layman's terms, we don't go overboard. We don't go crazy. As a matter of fact, we don't really have any real debt other than the mortgage that we pay on this building. So we don't just charge things, is what I'm saying, and then hope that the money's going to come in later. So I want you to know that so that you know as a church, we have always been and will continue to be committed to doing the right thing with the money that you invest in this church. So you won't see me with a helicopter or a jet. No shade on those who have one, but that's just not our philosophy of ministry here at Tri-Cities Church. We want you to know that we are responsible to you and accountable to you for what we ask you to give in your tithes and offerings. And every year, we are very close to spending exactly what we bring in. You follow me? Now, go to 2021 for me. This is actually through September, so this doesn't include, obviously, October and the rest of the year. The reason why I want you to see this is because we did great in 2020. Only about $1,800 over budget. That's with the pandemic. But what I did tell the staff and the finance committee is we're not going to fill it right away when people are losing jobs and losing money and we're not going to fill it right away, but eventually we will fill it. So in 2021, we did not increase our budget at all. The same thing that we budgeted for 2020, we budgeted for 2021 because we knew that somewhere along the way we're going to take a shortfall because, the economy, things got pretty bad for most of us, and we understand that. So I want you to see where we are right now. In 2021, actual expenses through September is $207,000, and then the income $240,000. Now, here's what's important to know. Those expenses keep going up, and we realized that this was going to happen, we are continuing to take a shortfall. Now, here's the thing. It hasn't been a tremendous shortfall in our budget. It's really been maybe about $500 or $600 a week short of what we need weekly to operate. The problem is that when that continues over a long period of time, it ends up being about a $20,000, $25,000 deficit in the red. Now, why I'm sharing that with you transparently is because although we've done well, we're starting to now hit the period where it's catching up to us financially. And so as a finance team and elders, because we want to have some insight, okay, I gave you foresight into what is actually happening, before we get to the point where this becomes something that is uncontrollable, we want to try to get a handle on that. You follow me? Because $500 or $600 off every week doesn't seem like a lot, but then you do that for 52 weeks, and you have an entirely different budget. We will end up, we project, if we stay in that trend, about $25,000 in the red. And so we want you to know, transparently and authentically, this is what's happening, and it's because it's the season that we live in. As a matter of fact, I told the staff, I started measuring not just how we're doing, but measuring how things are going across all organizations that are kind of gathering organizations, even if they're not churches. And you notice this, every organization that their primary goal is to gather people, whether it's restaurants or movies or sporting events, everyone has really struggled in this area. So we're not unique in the fact that we've struggled in this area. And the good news is we're not unique in that we're doing bad. It is the season that we're in. The reason why I need you to know is because I need you to be seers. I need you to see where things are going, and we'll talk about some things that we are going to attempt to do to make sure that 12 months from now, we don't find ourselves in a huge deficit. At that rate, we would probably be, I think we talked about this, 15 to 20 months, maybe I think 20 months is the furthest out, where we would have depleted some of the funds that we have because we continue to take a shortfall. But we want to have insight. We don't want to just wait until that happens. We want to have insight, and because of the insight, we want to have foresight. You follow me? So we are letting you know this is where we are as a church. So what does the plan look like? And these are things that we're talking through. Some will be implemented. Some may not be implemented right away. Some are worst case scenario if we have to implement some of these things. The first thing is, and I got to share this because Jamie Stovall came back and has reassumed the position of City Kids pastor, but even that was to be a 6-month transition to help out after the chamber stepped off. And so we're coming towards the end. Now, they're not leaving the church, so I want to make sure that we're clear about that. But I'm thankful that she stepped up, especially during a time where I wasn't around a lot because I was doing treatment. And she stepped back in to say, I will take this on. But one of the things that we have decided, because we are still rebuilding, is that when she steps off, one of the ways that we can curb this shortfall and stop, quote unquote, stop the bleeding is because we've had a smaller number of children. Right now, we're not requiring a City Kids pastor to minister to I think on the high end, at most we have 20 children. So what we've decided is one of the ways that we could help stop the bleeding is to take a minimum of a year and do City Kids as we rebuild it as a volunteer-based led program, which means we are going to need you to step up. We've already started recruiting teams that'll rotate every week, but what that does is it helps us, one, to stop the bleeding, but two, in the middle of a pandemic, it's very difficult to try to put together a team and to put together an opportunity to hire, and so we don't want to rush into doing something that we might regret later. And because we don't necessarily have the numbers of 60, 70, sometimes 80 kids pre-pandemic that we had, right now we're not requiring something that cannot be done if we have volunteers step up and help rotate every week. So it helps us to plan properly to hire, but it also helps us to stop a little bit of the bleeding. So when she steps off at the end of the year, our City Kids program will be volunteer-led, and we will have teams that will rotate, and we need your help with that. And that gives us an opportunity as a church so that we can continue to be physically responsible for the money that we've brought in. The other thing that I want to share, and I got to speed up here, is here's what I want to ask, and we want to ask people to do. And so we want to start this in the new year, but by any means, you're welcome to start doing this as soon as you are able. But if we can get just 50 people to contribute an additional $20 over and above their tithe, then over the course of the year, that will stop the bleeding and it will bring us back into the black. Just if we can just get 50 people in the building, at home, even those who are across the country. I don't know if you knew this, there are people who watch from all over who give to this church. So example is if your regular tithe is $100 every 2 weeks, if you add a 20 extra dollars to that, and we get enough people to do that, it will help us to curb. Now, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if you think about it, 50 people giving an extra $20 above what they already give over the course of a year will put us back where we need to be. So I want you to pray about that. Certainly we'll do it. Start at the beginning of the new year. I'm going to do it. I'll probably start doing it already. If you're ready and comfortable and you've recovered financially and you're able to do that, you can start doing that now. But that's one way that we will help with what we see as insight, a shortfall that is coming for us in the near future. All right, so here's a couple of other things that we'll do. We'll continue to review the budget for additional adjustments. We'll review the finances. And this is kind of a worst-case scenario. We'll review finances and release designated funds if needed. Now, designated funds are those things that we ask you to give specifically towards, like a portion of our big give a year ago went to our special needs ministry. We still have that money because it's designated. We don't use it for anything but special needs ministry. If for some reason, and this is last case, worst case scenario, if for some reason things continue to trend the way that they are, we will have to come back to you and say, we want to get your permission, because you gave to that, to release those funds so that we can stay afloat. Now, that's a worst case scenario. We want to stay committed to keeping the funds that we ask you to give towards for that specific reason. But at the same time, if we continue to see that things are going in a direction where we might need to release those funds, we will come back to you. We will give a 14-day period for anyone who wants to ask questions. And if we have no objections to that because we're accountable to you, then we will release those funds. Again, that is a worst-case scenario. We have no intentions on doing that because we want to honor what you've given that money for. Does that make sense? And then we'll continue, this may not be on there, but we'll continue to be generous as a church. I believe in that. The leaders of this church believe that way before I got here, that part of how we continue to honor God is to continue to be generous. So we have no intentions on cutting the things that we are doing to help the community. You don't get out of a financial situation by being more stingy. You invite God into the situation by continuing to be generous with what he's already blessed you with. So our intention is to not cut the food program, and we thank all the volunteers that we have. As a matter of fact, when we first started the food program, we said, how long are we going to do this? And the staff will tell you, we met about, and I said, we'll do it as long as we can. If people are hungry, we're going to feed them. And I just believe, and Jamie can attest to this, I said, I just believe somehow God's going to make up the difference. Because it really wasn't in our budget. We didn't budget for a pandemic. We didn't budget for 50 extra people to feed every week. But I felt strongly, and the leadership felt strongly, that you do the things that God will have you to do, and God will bless you for it. So that's not in a way to say we're trying to manipulate God into giving us more. It's just a spiritual principle. We believe in being generous. And we believe because of that, God is going to continue to maintain us and sustain us. So I, as a pastor, as your leader, am not worried at all financially. You know why? Because we're a generous church. And we give so much to the community, and I believe that God sees that, and God's not going to let us fall short. So one of the ways that that we want to also examine is, I don't know if you knew this, but your church also gives 10%. So we don't just ask you to give 10%. As an organization, we give 10%. Now, keep in mind, we budget for that. We budget. So every month, whatever we bring in, we take 10% of that, and I'm going to show you how we divvy that up. But that's not even including Big Give. So as a church, this is probably one of the most generous churches I've ever pastored. As a church, we routinely give anywhere between 15 and 20%, depending on Big Give, sometimes 25% of our total income away, depending on how much Big Give is. So we budget for 10%, and then Big Give has routinely come in at about 15, about maybe 10, 12% of what our actual income is. So you remember one year we raised $32,000. Our budget for that year was only $300,000. That's over 10%, including the 10% that we already give. You follow me? So we are a generous church. I say that to say I am not afraid about what's happening because I believe that God will honor our generosity. Some of the ways that we divvy up that 10% is it divvies up into 5, 3, and 2. So 5% goes to Stadia, the church planting organization that helped us plant. That's to help other church planters. 3% goes to Christian Financial Resources, which is a group that we have investment accounts with. That also goes to help other churches. And then 2% of that goes to help with future church planting, which is one of the things I love when I came to Tri-Cities Church. From the beginning, it had the idea that we need to multiply churches. So that money has been dedicated. 2% of that 10% goes to help to start another church. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So one of the things that I love, and this is Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. It's not on the screen. I just added it this morning. It's in the Message translation. It says, "So let's not allow ourselves to get fatigued in doing good. At the right time, we will harvest a good crop if we don't give up or quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get the chance, let us work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith." Paul is encouraging us, and I'm encouraging us, even though we're being transparent and telling you we got some insight, this is where it's going, let's not give up doing good things. Because he says, in the end, there will be a harvest if you just keep doing the right thing. We will stay on course with doing what's right with the money that you have invested in this church through your tithes and offerings. We're not going to quit feeding people. We're not going to quit all the good work that we've done in the community. We will continue that because the word says at some point, I don't know when, there will be a harvest for that. So even though we project that we are headed in the direction of being in the red, we're still going to do the right thing with what God has blessed us with. You following me? Now, he does say, and I might get myself in trouble for saying this, but he does say, let us work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith. So what we have talked about, and we haven't shared this with anyone, haven't even shared it with the people that we intend to do this with, is that part of that 10%, because we've met some of our obligations with some of these other organizations. And Paul says, let us do well to work for the benefit of starting with the people closest to us in the community of faith. One of the things that we want to do in 2022 is shift some of that, as I broke down the 10%, to organizations that are closer to us in the community. One of which, and I didn't even tell them this, so you're going to hear this for the first time, is CCS. Because we have a close relationship with them. You know, that's Leroy and Nikki's organization. We have them speak. We have a close relationship with them, and we want to provide them with some monthly support. And so we'll talk about that, what that looks like. It's okay to clap. But because they do good work and they're close to us, and Paul says, let's work for the benefit of those who are closest to us in the community of faith. And so we've met some of our obligations with some of that 10% that we've given, and we want to shift some of that to help them and to make sure that I believe this is what the word says, heart follows treasure. Wherever you put your money, that's where your heart will be. And as a church, they have done such a great job of including us in their mission, and I think it's time for us to make sure that our heart is more closely connected to what they're doing in the community. So we want to put some of our treasure there. And we'll talk more about what that's going to look like. All right, let me quickly go through facilities, because we had a vision and a plan at the beginning of 2020 to do some things, and obviously we got some of those things done. I want to quickly just sort of go through that, because 2020, It was a doozy, but it wasn't all bad. There were still some things that we were able to accomplish. So I don't know if you remember this, but we stood in front of you in February 2020 and said there's some things that we need to get done on the building. One of those was the roof leak in the lobby, so we got that done thanks to your generosity. We updated the sanctuary. Remember we said we were going to do that? It seems so long ago, right? But in February of 2020, we said we wanted to update the sanctuary, and we did it because of your generosity. So 2020 wasn't all bad. Remember, hindsight, insight, what is God doing beneath the surface? We updated our streaming technology. Who knew, right? Who knew that was going to be critical for what we're dealing with now? And that's because of your generosity, we're able to do that. We added new cameras, so if you can see, I want you to go back and watch how we were doing church when the pandemic first hit, and then watch the quality now. Because most people don't know, like, we were putting together phones, and then myself and Daniel would stay up all night editing video. And then, I have to say, this is so funny. There's one sermon that I preached that you'll notice that it was like pitch black in the building. That was the one where I was like going to different rooms. That's because I had recorded that sermon 4 times, and the technology kept breaking. And finally, I'm like, y'all just gonna get whatever I can give you. Because we were patch mailing phones and all kinds of stuff and so we decided, let's just do it right and invest in getting some good equipment, because I was tired of preaching. You have no idea, some of the sermons that were preached last summer, I preached them multiple times because we kept losing files. So because of your generosity, we were able to get better equipment so that we could do this. And it's been helpful even as we become a church that's trying to be more inclusive of those with disabilities and special needs, because we're able to get better quality video out to people who are not able to come to us. So we're thankful for that. This happened this year. I don't know if you knew this. We needed new gutters badly. And so we were able to get new gutters. And so part of the expenses, the reason why they were up, is because some of the stuff that we had to do this year in particular is because there were things that just needed to be done to the building that we cannot afford not to do. And so we were able to get all new gutters. Go out, check it out when you leave. Just look how nice it looks. That's what you gave to. We replaced some damaged doors. We had some doors that were damaged and were unsafe. And so we replaced some of those. And then we increased some of our safety protocols because of COVID. So, we mentioned that we're spraying everything down. One of the big ways, and that's just not all of it, like we put touchless paper towel machines in the bathrooms. But one of the biggest ways that we stepped it up is we actually, for I guess 6-7 years, the building has been cleaned by a team of volunteers. And so one of the things that we decided to do is to just go ahead and hire a professional cleaning service so that we can, one, alleviate some of the stress from the volunteers we're having to do there with the extra stuff that needed to be done, but also to make sure that we're doing it right so that we could feel safe about asking you to come in. So that's one of the reasons why some of the expenses went up. Not terribly high, but it was something we felt was necessary, especially in this season. So some of the things that we want to look forward to facilities-wise, the update of the sanctuary was just one phase. We also had some stuff that we wanted to try to do to make this green space out front a little bit nicer and a place where people can hang out. So there's some landscaping things that we want to try to do in the future. We want to also, as soon as the price of lumber stops costing an arm and a leg in your firstborn, we want to build a better media station for our team back there. They work, come on, just give them a hand. They work so hard, and you have no idea the stuff that they have to troubleshoot on the fly. And we want them to have a nicer workstation, a nicer space, so we're looking forward to building something there. Again, this is not exhaustive, but then also we're looking at some of the furniture and equipment for City Kids as we build that program back up, replacing some of that. And then particularly as we continue to develop our disability and special needs ministry, there's some equipment that we will need to get. And so we're looking forward to doing that in the future. Now, let me end with this, because I've taken a while, but I really want you to be good seers of what's going on. Is this helpful for you to know what's going on in your church? Okay. So let's talk about the future. We talked about hindsight. I gave you some insight. Here's what we see God is doing. Here's some things in the future. I want you to understand, so when we talk about building faith, belonging to family, and being the church as environments, there are specific applications to each one of those things as a vision that we try to do to help make sure that those environments stay healthy. So when it comes to building the faith, one of the things that we try to focus on is discipleship, assimilation, and leadership development. That's how we continue to foster an environment of faith building. For belonging to family, the things that we want to focus on as part of the vision is worship, small groups, and hospitality ministry. Those are things that we invest time in to make sure that the belonging to family part of the vision continues to be healthy and grow. And then the be the church part of the vision, the things that we specifically apply to that area of the vision is we want to focus on service, evangelism, local and global ministries and outreach. That makes sure that the be the church arm of our vision remains vibrant and healthy and growing. So I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of all the things that we want to do because right now we're in a season where we can't do everything, but there are some things that we want to do. So starting with belonging to family, I think one of the things that we can do and we want to do in the future that's going to be helpful, especially as we find ourselves trying to reconnect after being disjointed, is to spend a lot of time focusing on the belong to family part of our vision. So that means a couple of things. We want to increase the number of groups when it comes to small groups. Here's something that I'm looking forward to do at the top of the new year is to bring in some things for the men, particularly something called Man Cave Monday. We'll just start off once a month. We'll come together with the men of the church, and I'll be spending some time with them, and we'll just kind of organically let it grow into the type of men's ministry. We want to see what God is doing, and then we want to ride that way, but we want to get started. And then Wednesday morning prayer, who all remembers when we were doing Wednesday morning prayer virtually? We're going to start that back. Now, I'll give you a date when that's going to start back, but for me, it was life-giving. So if nothing else, I'm doing it because I like to pray with y'all. But we want to bring that back. Then we want to try something called After Party, and it is an opportunity for a small group that will discuss the sermon. So you get an opportunity real time. A lot of what we do on Sunday is monologue, but I think part of our development and helping to become better disciples is to have more opportunities for dialogue. So that will be, for the time being, virtual, so I'll give more information about when that's going to start. And so After Party will happen after church. It won't happen immediately after church. I'm looking at sometime maybe in the afternoon or evening where you can get lunch and we can digest. You don't have to come back. And then we just get online and just discuss what you heard and how that works for you. And then we want to increase and strengthen the current city groups that we have, some that are still meeting. We're going to get lists of those who are still meeting and start pushing that again for you to get involved in those that are in person, and then maybe some that are virtual. All right, guest experience. We want to do something that is really important now that we live in this virtual world. We need to think about how we welcome people on social media and online. So we're going to be looking and asking people to serve as social media hosts. I've been kind of sort of doing that when I wasn't here. But now that I'm here, it's hard for me to do that while I'm preaching and monitor the chat room. So we want to get some people that'll help us do that. And then also we want to increase and improve our social media and web presence because that's going to be even more important as we live in this virtual world. Then we want to, for service, evangelism, and missions, it's not exhaustive, but we do want to return to becoming a more disability-friendly and inclusive church. So we're going to begin to start some teams that will help us to figure out the next steps that we want to do with that. That's going to be a huge part of us living into our value of diversity so that we're expanding it, not just diversity of race and ethnicity and economic class, but also diverse abilities. We want to be a church, and I think that's going to be a marked improvement for people in this community to have a church that they know that's going to welcome them and serve their kids. So we're going to focus on that. And then, of course, City Kids, we need to increase the number of volunteers, rebuild the attendance so parents start bringing your kids back, and then also increase the number of volunteers for our teen small group as well. Something that the Stovall's have been doing, something that I was doing and enjoyed doing before I got sick, but we do need more people to get involved with that as well. All right, here's a 3 to 5 year plan, and then I'm going to wrap it up because we've been here for a while. 2022, I don't know if you remember this. We said this in last year's Vision Night, that we want to create a feasibility team for a new TCC campus. Now, people are saying, how are we going to do that in the middle of a pandemic? Like, we don't even got all the people coming back yet. So can I just tell you, when you look in hindsight and you have some insight, and I can't give you all the details, a large part of that has already started happening. Even though we didn't go into with an intentional plan, there's some things that we've noticed that God is doing beneath the surface with our relationships with other churches. And so we have a lot of potential. As a matter of fact, our team is meeting this week to talk about what that's going to look like. So we are still very much in track with being able to do that, to have a second campus in Hayfield. It didn't come the way that we thought it was going to come. But God has definitely been doing some stuff during this pandemic that we're like, ooh, why didn't we think about that? And so we're going to meet this week and talk, and once I get more details about what that looks like, we'll come back and let you know. But that's still very much a part of our vision, and it's still very much on track for that to happen. Then create a plan to retire the mortgage. Obviously, we talked about the trend that we're in, so we're going to continue to revisit that and to figure out ways where we can retire the debt here so that we can free up that money to do more ministry. That's the ultimate goal. And then we want to focus on in the next 3 to 5 years is a 30% increase in attendance. Some of that means getting some of the people to come back. So you know the people that used to sit next to you, tell them they need to come back. But also continue to reach out in our community and reach people who don't know Jesus. So it's not just getting saved folk to come back, it's getting people in our community who don't know Jesus and making sure that we continue to make that a part of the mission of our church. And then lastly is expand current staff. I told you the situation with that. We're not in a position just yet, but our 3 to 5 year plan is that we need to, as we grow, expand sort of the numbers that used to be, and Ben, you guys can come back up, the numbers that used to work, and I'm not sure what the current numbers are in church growth, is about 1 to 100. And so we're actually trending towards that. I don't know if you remember, like right in 2019 and some of 2020, we're actually trending upwards to close to 250 to 300, right? But as that grows, you want to make sure that you have the staff that can accommodate that. So that's a part of our 3 to 5 year plan. Now, so I want to end with what I started with. If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, they are most blessed. So let me thank you, because I took a lot of time, but I want you to be better seers so you can be better servants, so you can know what's going on in your church, and we can make the adjustments that we need to make. And I got to tell you, I am no less excited about the future of this church than I've ever been. Even though we've been in the middle of a pandemic, I still believe that God is still working, that God is not finished, that we are absolutely on track for all the things that we have noticed that God is doing and intends to do. And if we apply ourselves to catching the wave, I believe that God's going to give us a wave to ride that's going to be incredible. And in the next 2 or 3 years, you'll be looking back on this period of time and saying, man, God did something incredible. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this opportunity. We thank you for this moment. God, we thank you for a chance to take a good look at what you're doing in our church. And so, God, help us to be faithful stewards over what you're doing, and help us to be better seers so we can be better servants. God, we thank you and we love you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning. This is the time in the service that the environment is set for communion. If you are here in the building and you did not grab a communion cup this morning, just raise your hand and they'll come around. If you're at home, grab something. Participate in this with us as family. And also, if you're a worrier and you're stuck on the finance part, come back to us. If you're a dreamer and you're up at 30,000 feet, come back for a minute. I know that sermons like this and discussions like this can often send us in lots of different directions. But this time, is a time for you to reflect on your relationship with God and what he's doing. I'm going to read straight from our TCC website on what we believe about communion. Jesus asked his followers to regularly celebrate his sacrifice on the cross through a small meal of bread and wine. This memorial meal is a look back at what he did to pay for our sins. Hindsight. A look to the present at our current relationship with him. Insight. What's God doing? And a look to the future when he will return. Foresight. The pattern of the ancient church was to participate in this meal whenever they gathered, so we offer the Lord's Supper to his followers each Sunday. Take a moment to think through your relationship with Christ. Take a moment to reflect on what he's done for us in the sacrifice. Take a moment to reflect on the foresight of, we know the end. We know he wins. We know that through him, we have access to God. Mark 14, let me switch my screens here. Mark 14:22. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Take this time of communion to make it a time of reflection. God, we thank you for your plan, that from the very beginning you planned to keep us in relationship with you. You sent your son, Jesus, here to earth, and you sacrificed his life so that we have access to you. God, we love you and we thank you. Open our hearts to you this morning. Help us to reflect. Bring to mind those things that we need to work on or to get out of the way so that there's nothing in between our relationship with you as we come to communion. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Behold, Jehovah, seated on the throne. Abba, Father, the well that overflows, the God who was and is and shall be forevermore. Holy is the Lord.
up. If you can on the slides, go back to that 2021 number, because it didn't look right when I. So those numbers should be flipped. I want to make sure that I make a correction. The expenses is 240. The income is 207. Now remember, that includes us budgeting for a deficit, but it's still around that $20,000 to $25,000 shortfall that I was telling you about at first. You following me? So as I was looking at it, that didn't make sense. But I want you to make sure that you get that correction so it's not misleading you. Those numbers should be flipped. So I want to make sure that I made that correction. Thank you.
All right, more numbers. Here we go. My brain starts doing circles. I don't know about yours. Few announcements. Like we said at the beginning of the service, if you're here in the building and you have prayer requests, fill out this connection card. If you're watching online, we have a virtual connection card you can find at tri-citieschurch.com/connect. Teen Small Group will be meeting this afternoon right after church, and they will be finished at 12:30. Also, our bilingual service. Don't forget about that. It is on Sunday, October 31st. I believe if I do my math, that's 2 weeks. But, again, it's math. Otherwise, we are so glad that you joined us. If you are new or you have questions, see Adam back there at the Next Steps table. He is waiting and willing to talk to you. And if you're online, chat with somebody in the chat if you have some questions. Other than that, get connected. Like Pastor Lamar said earlier, follow that newsletter, follow us on social media so you know what's happening throughout the week with your family. You guys have a great day. Thank you for joining us.